The morning unfolded like every other for Ethan Cole, with the stubborn bleat of the alarm clock at 6:30 a.m. and the groggy shuffle toward the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of toast and children's shampoo. His daughter, Lily, sat at the table in her tiny pink pajamas, legs swinging as she scribbled with crayons. He gave her a tired smile, ruffling her hair. "Eggs or cereal today?" he asked. "Eggs, but not the runny kind," she said, wrinkling her nose. Ethan chuckled, cracking two into the pan. There was comfort in the rhythm of it, the hiss of butter, the scrape of the spatula, the sound of cartoons playing in the background. After his wife's death 3 years ago, mornings had become his anchor. Every motion, every habit kept the emptiness at bay. He helped Lily with her shoes, tied her hair into 2 messy braids, and bundled her into the car seat. She chattered about her teacher, her friends, her new glittery lunchbox. Ethan listened, nodding, smiling where he could. But beneath the noise, there was a quiet hollowness that even Lily's laughter couldn't always fill. The streets were still damp from a night of rain, puddles shimmering in the weak sunlight. He turned the same corner he did every morning, and there she was. The woman with the heavy tote bag. He didn't know her name. Didn't know where she came from or where she went. But she was always there, at that same cracked sidewalk beside the old brick cafe, struggling with the same oversized bag. Her coat, deep navy, slightly frayed at the sleeves, made her look small against the wind. The first time he saw her, he hadn't planned to stop. He was already late for work, and the light was changing. But when her bag slipped open and papers fluttered like frightened birds across the street, instinct took over. He'd parked the car, told Lily to wait, and ran to help. She'd looked startled at first, then grateful. "Thank you," she'd said, her voice soft, like a melody almost lost in the noise of the city. After that day, it became habit, a strange, quiet ritual that neither of them acknowledged but both seemed to expect. He'd pull over, roll down his window, and say, "Need a hand again?" And she'd give that small, tired smile, the one that made her eyes gleam with something unreadable, and say, "If you don't mind." He'd carry her bag across the street, exchange a few words, and she'd catch her bus. Sometimes they talked about the weather, sometimes about nothing at all. But there was something peaceful about it, the way she said his name once when he finally introduced himself, how gently she smiled when Lily waved from the car window. "Daddy," Lily said one morning, her tone mischievous. "That lady likes you." Ethan laughed. "She's just being polite, sweetheart." "Then why do you always look at her in the mirror after we drive away?" He didn't answer. Maybe it was because she looked like she carried a story too, one as heavy as the bag she always clutched. There were mornings when her hands trembled slightly as she reached for it, or when her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. He never asked why. He didn't want to intrude. But sometimes, he wondered what kind of weight she was hauling, invisible and unseen. That morning, the sky was silver and cold. He parked as usual, stepped out, and offered his hand. She hesitated a moment longer than usual before letting him take the bag. "Long night?" he asked gently. "You could say that," she murmured. Her voice was a whisper carried on the breeze. As he lifted the strap onto his shoulder, he caught a glimpse of a small sketchbook poking from the top, the corner of a pencil drawing, a face he couldn't quite make out. She noticed him looking and quickly zipped it shut. "Artist?" he asked. She smiled, faintly. "Used to be." He wanted to ask what happened, but she turned toward the bus stop, and he followed quietly, keeping pace. The city was waking up around them, coffee steam drifting from the cafe door, the low hum of passing cars, the smell of wet asphalt. For a brief second, he imagined how strange it would be to walk beside her not as a stranger, but as someone who mattered. Someone who could ask real questions, not just polite ones. When they reached the corner, he handed back the bag. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief but electric, startling in its warmth. "Thank you," she said, her eyes meeting his. There was something in her gaze, recognition, maybe, that made his chest tighten. "It's no trouble," he replied softly. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression flickering between hesitation and sadness. "You really don't remember me, do you?" she whispered. The words barely reached him at first. He blinked. "I'm sorry." But she only smiled, that same faint, aching smile that carried both sorrow and tenderness. "Never mind." Before he could speak again, the bus arrived with a rush of air. She stepped on, gave him one last look through the fogged window, and disappeared into the crowd of passengers. Ethan stood there, confused, staring after her. Something in her tone unsettled him, like a thread pulled loose from a fabric he hadn't realized was fraying. Back in the car, Lily was watching him curiously. "Daddy, what did she say?" "Nothing, honey," he murmured. But even as he started the engine, the words echoed in his mind. "You don't remember me." All day at work, the phrase looped in his thoughts, tugging at something deep and half-buried. He'd catch glimpses of her face in his memory, her eyes, her smile, the quiet sadness that seemed to cling to her. Had they met before? Maybe at Lily's school, the hospital, somewhere in the years that had blurred together after the accident. When he tried to picture her then, something inside him flickered, a half-memory, like a candle behind fogged glass. A room, sterile and bright. The sound of beeping monitors. A gentle hand on his shoulder, steadying him as his world fell apart. A woman's voice, soft and certain, "She's not in pain anymore." He drew a sharp breath, the image dissolving before he could grasp it. That evening, he stood at the kitchen counter, watching Lily color at the table. He should have been helping with her homework, or preparing dinner, but his mind was miles away, standing again at that bus stop, hearing that voice. He told himself it was coincidence, nothing more. That his imagination was just playing tricks on him. But even as he turned off the lights and carried Lily to bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was trying to reach across time to remind him of something he'd forgotten. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint echo of her words. "You don't remember me." And in the quiet of the night, for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't sure he wanted to forget anything anymore. The next morning dawned gray and restless, the kind of morning where even the air felt unsure. Ethan's car idled at the curb in silence. He didn't know why he'd come early, or why he kept checking the empty sidewalk where she usually stood. Maybe he was hoping she'd be there, pretending yesterday hadn't happened. Maybe he wanted to ask what she meant. But the corner was empty. He waited until the light turned green, then drove on, his chest heavy with a feeling that had no name. All through the day, the memory of her voice lingered, soft, trembling, almost afraid. "You don't remember me." He couldn't shake it. It followed him through meetings, through lunch, through the meaningless chatter of coworkers. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, that sad half-smile, those pale green eyes filled with something he couldn't place. That night, after putting Lily to bed, he found himself in the attic, searching through boxes he hadn't touched in years. Dust rose like ghosts as he lifted the old cardboard flaps. Inside were fragments of another life, photo albums, receipts, birthday cards, his wife's handwriting on the back of an old grocery list. And then he found the photo. It was from the hospital fundraiser. His wife, Julia, smiling despite the scarf tied over her bald head. Next to her stood a younger woman in scrubs, holding a tray of coffee cups, the edges of her hair escaping her ponytail. Ethan froze. The same eyes. The same gentle smile. The woman at the corner was Grace Parker, one of the volunteer nurses from the oncology ward. He remembered her now, though dimly. The last night before Julia passed, Grace had been there. She'd held his wife's hand. She'd tried to talk to him when he couldn't speak. When everything blurred into white walls and the sound of heart monitors fading into silence. He remembered breaking, sobbing into his hands, and someone, a nurse, had caught him before he fell. Her voice had been steady then, warm and firm. "You're not alone, Mr. Cole." She knew how much you loved her. That voice. He sat on the cold floor for a long time, the photo trembling in his hands. When morning came, he dropped Lily off at school, but instead of heading to work, he turned toward the cafe near the corner. He didn't even know if she'd be there. But he had to see her. He needed to understand why she'd come back into his life, why she'd let him walk past her every morning like a stranger. The bell over the cafe door chimed softly as he stepped inside. The air smelled of roasted coffee and rain. At a corner table by the window, she sat alone, stirring her cup absently. Her coat was draped over the back of the chair, her scarf folded neatly on the table. When she looked up and saw him, her hand stilled. Her expression shifted from surprise to something quieter, resignation mixed with relief. "I was wondering if you'd come," she said. He walked closer, hesitating before sitting across from her. "I remembered," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her lips trembled into a small, sad smile. "I hoped you would." Ethan set the photo on the table. "You were there, at the hospital. You helped Julia." Grace nodded slowly. She was remarkable. Even at the end, she made everyone laugh. "I still remember her teasing the doctors about the food." Her eyes softened. "She talked about you and Lily constantly. You were her world." He swallowed hard. "I was so lost after she died. I barely remember anyone from that time. Everything's a blur. I know, Grace said quietly. You were in shock. I didn't expect you to remember me. She hesitated, glancing toward the window, her reflection blurred by the drizzle outside. When I moved back into town, I started taking the bus again. The first morning I saw you drive by with your little girl, I almost thought I was dreaming. You looked different, alive. I didn't want to disturb that. Then why say something? He asked, his voice soft but strained. She looked down, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. Because I couldn't keep pretending you didn't know me. You helped me every morning, and I kept thinking, maybe this was the universe's way of reminding me that people heal. But when you looked at me and didn't remember, she exhaled shakily. It hurt more than I expected. For a while, neither of them spoke. The cafe's low murmur filled the silence, spoons clinking, milk steaming, quiet laughter from somewhere behind the counter. Finally, Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded envelope. She slid it across the table. Before she passed, Julia asked me to give you this. I never found the right moment. After the funeral, I thought it wasn't my place anymore. Ethan's hands shook as he took it. Inside was a note written in his wife's familiar looping script. My love, it began. If you're reading this, I want you to know that it's okay to live again. It's okay to smile, to laugh, to love. You've given me the best years of my life. Don't let my ending be your ending too. He read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring as his eyes filled. Grace said nothing, only reached across the table and rested her hand gently on his. It wasn't the touch of a stranger. It was quiet, steady, human, the kind of touch that pulled you back from the edge. I didn't want to hurt you by reminding you, she said softly. But I thought maybe she'd want you to have peace. He nodded, unable to speak. His throat was thick with something raw and grateful. You kept her promise, he finally managed. Grace smiled faintly. It wasn't hard to. You and Lily deserve to be happy. They sat together for a long time, saying nothing more. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight began to break through the clouds in golden streaks. People hurried by, umbrellas closing, the city slowly coming back to life. Ethan folded the letter carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. Thank you, he said, and the words felt too small for what he meant. Grace shook her head. No, thank you, for stopping that first morning. For noticing me. He laughed softly, still blinking away tears. You think I could have missed you? Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, he saw not just the woman from his grief, but the woman standing here now, alive, kind, and quietly strong. There was no pity in her gaze, only understanding. Would you, maybe, he began, hesitant, like to have dinner sometime? With me and Lily. Grace's expression brightened with a warmth that reached her eyes. I'd love that. The light outside caught her face, soft and golden, turning her hair into threads of copper. For a moment, Ethan could almost feel Julia's presence beside him, not in sorrow, but in peace, as if she were whispering, see. You found your way back. When they finally stood to leave, the world seemed gentler somehow. The clouds had lifted, the air smelled clean, and the hum of the city felt less like noise and more like life returning. Grace held the door open for him, smiling. Same time tomorrow? She asked playfully. He grinned, the first real smile in a long, long time. You can count on it. As they stepped out into the sunlight, two paths that had once crossed in grief now began again, not as strangers bound by loss, but as souls learning, slowly, that healing sometimes finds you when you least expect it.